Welcome to
Tamarindo Podcast.
Hosted by me, Brenda Gonzalez, a fitness coach, political nerd, and nonprofit capacity builder.
And me, Delsy Sandoval, a Guatemalan-American licensed therapist and passionate creativity advocate. Together, we're here to uplift our community through powerful conversations with changemakers, creatives, and healers.
Each week on the pod, we talk politics, culture, and personal development. Listeners call Tamarindo the Advocacy and Self-Love Podcast. Vámonos!
Let's start the show!
Hey, Delsy. Welcome back to Tamarindo. How are you?
Hi, Brenda. Hi, Tamarindo listeners. I'm doing well. How you doing?
I am, I'm feeling really excited, really energized because we're back and we had a fabulous conversation about running, and I was able to squeeze in a Pilates session today. So I'm feeling super energized. How is your hump day going? We're recording on a Wednesday here.
It's going really good. I have training today, personal training, and I'm also going on a long walk with one of my close friends. So I'm really excited about just being done with my day and getting outside and enjoying that sunlight.
Yes, I love it. I love a walk and talk. Okay, so today, this episode, we're going to talk about something that many of us have experienced. We've all probably at some point in our lives been at a workplace that didn't feel inclusive, or where we felt like we couldn't be our authentic selves, or maybe we were even in a leadership position and we were feeling like kind of caught between, the people that that report to us and the managers, trying to shape a culture that feels more inclusive. We've all can relate to this. We even asked our listeners to submit some situations and stories, and it sounds like we're not alone in experiencing these moments. So we're going to dive right into all of that in just a moment. We're going to talk about the different tools and resources that we might be able to access to actually influence some change in our workplaces. But before we do that, we are continuing with our practice here of doing some more get to know you, our Entre Nos segment, where we're going to ask each other some get to know you questions using some tools that we have, like a randomizer. So I'll give it to you, Delsy, to start us off.
All right. I'm really excited. I love this game. Last time was so much fun when I was listening back. And Brenda, I was thinking, what if we started with you? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, so you're going to ask me.
Okay. I'm going to ask you. All right.
Perfect.
So drum roll. What do we have? All right. What's the most embarrassing thing that has ever happened to you during a wellness or a fitness class?
Oh gosh, I have such a good one. All right. Okay. So one of the works, I've done all kinds of things, right? I've done all kinds of different sort of workout classes. I like to try these sorts of things. But for a while, I was pretty regularly going to a guy named Muammar. He was amazing. He was such a great trainer. And it was early in the mornings, at 5:30 in the morning. Okay. And when we first got our dog Frida, when she was a puppy, she was really into chewing my unmentionables. Okay. Like underwear, bras, these sorts of things. I often found them with holes. Well, okay, it's 5:30 in the morning. I put on my workout pants. I make it all the way to Muammar where he's at, and we're doing burpees, and I just feel like a little bit of a breeze in between my legs. What the heck? What? And so I look, and Frida, my then brand new puppy, had chewed the crotch part of my pants. It was dark, but I was like, I cannot risk another burpee here. So I said, I gotta go. I got an emergency, and I just left. So that's my situation.
Oh my God, that's so crazy. And I feel like people listening can relate, because dogs and cats too really chew up everything. And oh my God, how embarrassing.
It was so embarrassing. Luckily, I think people just assume maybe I started my period, or who knows what they thought. I don't think anybody saw what was going on. But the other sad part is that I loved these pants, and I had to throw them away. They were $80 workout pants. Man, puppies are so expensive.
Well, it could have been worse. You could have been doing a downward dog or something.
Oh my gosh, I know. Luckily, it was not a yoga class, right? It was not a yoga class. All right, Delsy, I'm going to ask you. So let's do the drum roll here again.
Okay.
All right. So the question that I have for you is, what is the most adventurous thing you've ever done, and would you try it again?
It's funny because when I hear that question, my initial reaction is to just smile, just a big, genuine smile, because this is probably my favorite memory of my whole life as a person. And one year, obviously going through some kind of crisis, because I got rid of my apartment. I put all my stuff in storage and I quit my job. And I took
Love
all of
it.
my savings and I just went to Southeast Asia and I backpacked for several months. And I went to like 5 or 6 countries, just all on foot, taking like mass transit, taking the train systems, all of that stuff, and didn't have the internet. I decided I couldn't pay for my phone, so I had no
Oh
internet.
my
So I just
gosh. Wow.
used like
Wow.
translation books, like these Lonely Planet guides and things like that. And I met people from all over the world. I had moments of fear. I had moments of, unknowns. I was hungry sometimes. I was cold sometimes, but I was mostly just like filled with awe and wonder and joy. And for somebody like me, it really felt like it was the first time that I felt like I was living. And so
That
it was the
sounds
most beautiful
amazing.
thing. I often dream of doing it again, and I almost think like it's an unhealthy escapist fantasy. But I think at this age, it could just can't be replicated. I'm just too tired to do to do it that way. I'm gonna need a hotel, Brenda.
I think you could do it, but it's going to cost way more, right? Way more than you're going to want that Google Maps on your phone. I mean, I know I would, but that's
Yes.
really awesome. And would you say this, if someone is thinking about doing this, would you recommend this?
Oh, absolutely. If this is something that you that is normal for you or comfortable for you, the idea of the unknown, then this is magic. If you're someone who likes routine and stability, this is really scary, really uncomfortable. But yeah, I wish I would have just kept going. I wish I
It
would have just
sounds
kept going.
great. I love it. I love that adventurous spirit. I'm going to do what I can. It's definitely not going to be at that level, but I am trying to manifest a little bit, a version of that, of traveling a little bit and kind of leaving my LA, blanket that I have in my safety blanket. All right. So thank you. This has been so fun. We're going to continue doing these in the future episodes. Again, we've got such great episodes in store for y'all. So thank you so much for listening and for tuning in. And this is another example of a fabulous conversation. This is cool because we've also are experimenting with different things like having a panel. So in this case, we do have a panel of experts and it's a fabulous conversation. So we're talking to Dr. Lynette Mehta, who is the co-executive director of Calico Culture Strategies, where she leverages both firsthand experience and data-backed methods to build strategies and tools for organizations to build more inclusive workplaces. So we knew that Dr. Mehta was going to be perfect for a conversation about toxic workplaces. And joining her is also Dr. Annette Angus, and she is a microbiologist by training and a social activist by heart who is passionate about building the type of workplaces where everybody can thrive. Dr. Angus manages a team of scientists at the Clorox company, so we've got that corporate perspective. Both of these women are fabulous scientists, but as you all know, like just about every field, it's in science, it's not very welcoming to women and much less to women of color. So they have a lot of personal experience to draw on as leaders wherever they are on making more inclusive workplaces. So this was fabulous. And thank you everybody that submitted their stories or situations. We empathize with all of you. I know it doesn't feel possible to change your circumstance if you're in a place that feels very toxic, especially in a capitalistic society where we really sometimes feel very beholden to a paycheck, right? So we hope that after this conversation, you feel a little bit more, first of all, like you're not alone. And second, that there are some tools, some baby steps that you can take to maybe influence and change the culture of where you are. Or at least we're going to have you walk away with a little bit more knowledge of how to identify those red flags and maybe start to get that plan to get out of there if you need to. And we also flip it and talk about some of our green flags and the sort of things that we want to see more of in the workplace. So with that, let's get right into it. It's a nice, juicy, long conversation, and I can't wait for you all to hear it. So let's go. All right, welcome y'all. We are having a fabulous conversation about toxic work environments. We've all been there. Some of us have escaped. Some of us have shaped better work environments. And that's kind of what we're going to get to today. So we're really excited about our great panel of speakers. We're all going to chime in because I think we've all got some valuable insights on what it is to be in a toxic work environment and how to escape it and how to shape it. So with that, I'm going to have Delsy talk to each of you so that our listeners get to know you a little better.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you here. Thank you, Brenda, for that introduction. Lynette, I'd love to start. Can you briefly tell us a little bit about calico culture strategies and how you even started to work in this space?
Yeah, I'd love to. But first, thank you so much for having me on this pod. Huge fan of Tamarindo. Yes. Okay. So Calico Culture Strategies, we're a group based in the Bay Area in California. And what we do is we help organizations and teams that are like, you know what? We really want to have people feel like they belong. We want, the diverse folks that work with us feel like they have a voice, they're being listened, and to actually grow those like welcoming, healthy, non-toxic workplaces. And so what we do is we help people reach those goals by developing custom programs, custom tools to get them where they want to be and then set them up for long-term success. The way I got into this work, I'm Latina, I'm from Colombia, Bogota. I grew up in Nigeria, France, Venezuela, and Texas, which is like a country. And I went through a lot of different schooling, a lot of different environments, and there were places where I felt that I really belonged. And I was like, yes, I belong here, even though it looked different or I speak different, I feel included. And then there were places that were like really toxic, where I was like, do I even belong here? A lot of imposter syndrome. And I realized, we are really missing an opportunity when we have these toxic workplaces. We're like letting people go that have amazing dreams that could like be the next cure for cancer, that could be like the next major like activist. We're missing out on opportunities when we have this toxic workplaces. And so we built Calico Culture Strategies, which we also just call Calico, because we wanted to help people feel like they can include and help you feel empowered and like it's fun and it's an everybody's job, not just like the one person in HR. But yeah, that's Calico.
Thank you. I really love how you're framing this from a solution-focused place. Oftentimes we hear a lot about the toxic work environment, but we're not quite sure what the next step is to fix it or to change it. And so I'm excited to hear more. Annette, you describe yourself as a microbiologist by training and a social activist by heart. Tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Sure, absolutely. So those are my two sides. And sometimes, depending on how you know me, you may know me as the microbiologist or you may know me as a social activist. And some people have the pleasure of knowing both sides of me. So I'll start with the professional side, I guess. So I am a PhD microbiologist. My tenure through academia, because I've existed in a lot of different spaces, but I have survived predominantly white institutions, originating from my primary education in private schools in K through 12, and then off to undergrad and then graduate school. Most recently, so I'm also in the Bay Area. The Bay Area has been my home off and on for about 24 years now. I originally came in 2004 to attend UC Berkeley, and it was a culture shock for me coming from Southern California. But I love the Bay Area. It's my home now, and I love it. A lot of lessons there because as I was attaining my academic credentials, I found myself in my lived experience constantly having to, again, navigate this world with no precedent. So my family's country of origin is in the Caribbean, in Jamaica. I'm first generation born. My mom actually came here pregnant with me, and first generation to obtain degrees. And so not having a like professional precedent or any kind of precedent as what it means to be an American in this country has exposed me to a lot of, as you can imagine, the gamut of racism, how to be a professional in a workspace, how to navigate things, how to be emotionally intelligent. All those things I had to navigate on my own. And one thing that I started to be able to frame for myself was what was a healthy work environment in my graduate days, because getting a PhD is like a job in the sciences. You are in the lab, like multiple hours, like beyond a regular 8-hour work shift. It's like this kind of cult like home away from home. And things can go to the left pretty easily if your boss or advisor isn't really, a great people manager, which, I mean, they're not there to be that. They're there to be researchers. And so what I found was that I started to develop my voice to be an advocate and participating in a lot of diversity, inclusion, and equity initiatives to break down a lot of the obstacles that I was finding myself challenged with to make sure, to pay it forward for others that were coming behind me. When I left academia and I went into industry, and I also worked in nonprofit, I found some of the same challenges, and I also saw some of the same behaviors in different workplaces. So this is something I feel really passionate about in terms of having gone through them, having experienced them in a multitude of ways, whether it's top down or coming from peers or the bottom. But yeah, so that's me in a nutshell. My activism is very, what I like to call sneaky and pervasive. Sometimes I'm in the streets marching, and sometimes it could be something like advocating for someone who feels like they don't have a voice. So that's who I am in a nutshell. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Annette. I love hearing about this. I'm so excited, especially about how your activism is sneaky. I love hearing the description of how you've evolved into this work. And I think for those that are listening, the real question here is what exactly are we defining as a toxic workplace? What makes a workplace toxic to begin with? Lynette, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting question, because when we're talking about people and culture, we all have shared terms, but sometimes we each define them differently. So when I talk about toxic workplace, it really actually comes from the eye of the beholder. So what your experience is, how the dynamics are working, you're probably going to see things that align with white supremacist principles. I know it sounds like a big scary word, but it's actually true. So when only one person holds the power and the decision making, there's only one right way of doing things. You can't speak up if you see a problem. People value everything that's written, and people adhere to time as something, religious or sanctimonious. Other things can be like being somewhat different from whatever the majority group is in the organization makes you feel excluded. So for example, if all the happy hours are happening when it's kid pickup time, if only the people that get promoted are in the small circle of friends of the CEO. There is also if you don't feel comfortable bringing up issues, like you want to come up to HR, or there's also toxic workplaces even between colleagues. So when colleagues are looking for ways to, I call them colleagues, but they're sabotaging you. Okay, let's face it. And which I've experienced before, when a colleague who's supposed to be helping you sabotages you or takes over your work. And then on top of that, your manager isn't either noticing or doesn't care or has preference for somebody else. So it can really, I think when it comes down to it, is what are the people's experiences in there? And if you're struggling, if you're trying to advocate for yourself, if the venues where you're supposed to be being heard aren't leading to anything, that's toxic. And, no workplace is perfect. Sorry, let me start again. And no workplace is perfect. Everything will have its challenges and issues. I mean, we're people, we're multitudes, we're complex, but it's when things become ingrained and anybody speaking up is silenced and things continue and keep reinforced being that way. That's when I think of it it's not just a few problems or little conflict, it's become toxic.
I really appreciate that, because you're putting kind of the onus on the person who's working there to decide whether or not their experience, it constitutes toxicity. I think that's a really important distinction in the way that I've heard it in the past. I'd like to hear more about that personal experience. Maybe Annette, you can tell us a little bit about your field. It's largely dominated by white men. Annette, you're in a field that's largely dominated by white men. What are some common challenges in your industry when it comes to creating inclusive work environments?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so a lot of workplaces are dominated by that type, right, in America. And the sciences is not unlike any of those. There's a long history of the sciences being predominantly white and predominantly male. And so, being on the opposite side of that spectrum, I can tell you what that looks like. What that looks like is um, meetings being at times when you need to drop off your kids or you need to pick them up. Um, Time spent outside work golfing. Um, Conversations that the subject matter is around something that would be typical for white folks or white males, right? Um, any kind of exclusion really hampers on folks' ability to have psychological safety. And so when I think about toxic work environments, I think about not feeling like you belong and also feeling like something is wrong with you. And when I think about the word toxic, it's, I mean, from a scientist perspective, it's like a systemic poison, right? And it eats at you. And that's what a toxic work environment does. It's this constant undermining that you belong and you bring value. And so typically what first happens when someone's in a toxic environment, they don't even know it, right? It's like if you take a drink of a poison and then, I don't know, depending on how toxic it is, it could be minutes, it could be hours, but then you succumb to that, right? And so in a toxic work environment, there are little hints that make themselves apparent that, oh, you're not okay. We can call them microaggressions, right? So something that may be not acceptable to the majority group is used to frame that your contributions are not professional, or maybe your look, your appearance is not acceptable, your style doesn't fit, and all of those things just are like, a thousand, like, tiny gashes, and at the end of the day, it makes one feel like it just feeds into the imposter syndrome. So those are some of the typical elements, and for the sciences, a field that really requires you to have in-depth thought leadership, right? It is very unique and very specific in that way that you can't have your head in the game, right? If you got to calculate something, or design something, or put together a method, or do something higher level thinking, if you're distracted by the microaggressions and the behaviors that make you feel like you don't belong, then it does actually affect your performance. So it's really complicated, and it's also a drain on one's ability to really bring the true value.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think you are sort of like painting the picture of what's at stake, right? Because we want our scientists to feel comfortable in what they're doing. And especially when there's such few scientists with our lived experience, if we're not making them comfortable, I mean, it's just like there's a lot at stake here with whatever experiment that you're working on. And I think everything you described is transferable to so many industries.
Right.
These examples of these microaggressions. Mm-hmm. So one thing we did is we invited our listeners to chime in. Like, what are the situations and scenarios that they've experienced, and maybe it could be something that we could all add some input, solutions, ideas. So speaking about microaggressions, this is an example that we got from a listener named Christina, and is I think a classic example of a microaggression. So in this example, Christina was promoted in name only to take on new responsibilities. Hooray! We've all experienced that before. Like, congratulations, let's test that you could do the work. Here's the new title. And sometimes that's fine. Sometimes it's like, okay, fine, let's have a probation period. Let's try this out. And so after 6 months, she inquired about, hey, where's that raise that we talked about? I've clearly have proven here that I can take on this responsibility. And her manager said, well, why do you want a raise? You don't even have kids. I have a family, so I need a raise, but what do you need it for? So that's a classic example of a microaggression, and I'm curious about what you all think about this. And this happened, in this decade.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. Annette, did you want to go first or
no,
shall I
go ahead.
take a stab? Okay. Well, I love this story that Christina submitted because there are so many layers in here. So, one is the putting on more work on somebody. And this often happens. So, in toxic workplaces, often the people that are performing well get overburdened with more work and they're not asked about their capacity or how they're getting more work done. They're not necessarily looking for sustainability. So I think that's really important here. You know, she got that new title, a promise for a raise. They gave her more work. They're not following up, right? If you're giving
Hmm.
somebody more work, that means they're a good worker. That means they're producing well, right? So there's like a lack of communication there of like back and forth where Christina would have been able to say, hey, I can take this on, but I need that raise sooner, or I can take this on, but that means that this particular project that you have me already on needs to go to somebody else, right? That's a missed opportunity there. The other piece is the having a really long wait period until somebody gets that raise. Like, if you're not going to immediately give a raise, do something else that is recognizing what they're doing, that is, you know, giving them up. You know, I'm not made of money. Like a lot of folks are made of money. In large corporations, you should not be delaying that raise. You get that new title, they get more work, they need that money. That's got to be paid. The other level here is the boss saying like, well, I actually need a raise because I have kids, you know, is that whole like, and I saw this a lot in academia too, like for listeners out there that don't know me, I also have a background as a scientist, and I saw this so much in science where even women scientists would ask other women scientists, like, are you taking your job seriously? Why are you going to have kids? When they see the other person not suffering or gaining or like improving, going up in the ladder, and they're like, well, why do you deserve that? Because I need it more. So it's like a mindset of scarcity, and if I went through that, then you should too, kind of thing. And so I'm obviously, I don't know this boss, but I feel like that's what's in the undercurrent. So instead of looking at it as, hey, I think our whole team should get a raise because, you know, I need more to support my family. You've done more, you know, you've added more work and you have a new title. Let's advocate for this together. It becomes a you versus me thing, right?
Yeah. And what about you, Annette? Do you have any thoughts on this particular situation? To me, it sounded like stuff that you've heard women experiencing in the past, but to know that these sorts of conversations are still happening today is
Mm-hmm.
very shocking.
Very shocking and yeah, really disappointing, right? Mostly disappointing, oftentimes, and I think Lynette, you hit on this, is when women do this to other women, right? So I was talking about the dominance of males and white males in sciences, but I would have to say that probably the worst behavior I have seen is women hazing young women coming up because of that, like, well, I went through this and you've got to pay your dues, and then therefore, you know, I've got to be hard on you because, you know, this is how you'll survive. And that's just so dysfunctional, right? Um, we have to learn from our past mistakes as good stewards, and we have to like take care of our communities, and doing things that were done in the past, I think we should learn from and not reenact, right? So there's that part. The other part is it's just unprofessional. Like, you know, you never know what someone's life experience is outside of the workplace. You know, you don't know what they spend their money on, their time on, what's important to them, right? And so positioning yourself as a manager in relationship to your direct report, like, well, I need this because of this, and therefore, again, like Lynette said, there's a scarcity of that, of resources, and if you're going to get this, I can't. One of the other tenets of a toxic work environment is pitting folks against each other. It can be, you know, up in the hierarchy, or it can be lateral, but that's something very toxic, right? If people aren't contributing in a work environment, then they shouldn't be there. It shouldn't be a competition. It should be a collaboration. So those are some other things that I took away from that. And yeah, it's really disappointing that stuff still happens. And when I say I'm a sneaky activist, when I see behaviors like that, I call it out. right? In such a way that sometimes people are like, they can't even tell what just happened, but like, it's like subtle shade, you know?
Yeah, you got to address it right in the moment. Now,
Right.
I like that you explained how a trait of a toxic work environment is where people feel like they have to be pitted against each other. We did have a listener that gave an example of a boss where it felt like their measure of success was putting all his direct reports in competition with each other. And it created a lot of toxicity. It created a spirit of retaliation if people needed to take maternity leave, just a whole slew of toxic things. And this listener ended up leaving that work environment and still carries trauma from that experience. I'm curious about how either of you, I mean, anybody here has worked through trauma or feeling like, gosh, that was such a horrible experience, and almost like working through that to then feel comfortable in a different work environment.
I can speak to that.
Yeah, I get it.
So I survived a work environment that was so toxic, it put me into regular therapy. It was the first time I learned about EMDR, which is a specific, very effective type of therapy that allows one to really process emotions coming from a very traumatic event, such that if they're triggered in the future, it's not as stimulating. So I learned about that, and it changed my life. Completely changed my life. I know other individuals who also came out of that work environment that had not gotten help and had not been able to recover. And it stayed with them and continued to impact the way that we're able to move on in their career. And that's really unfortunate because really talented, really gifted individuals forget who they are and what they have to contribute. And when you have, in the lens of inclusion and diversity, like, it's so rare to have someone who can do all the things to make it in this, America, right? And then to have them, kind of just fall apart after a toxic environment is so sad. And so when Lynette, came to me with this opportunity, I said, I really want to do this. And I really appreciate this forum, because I want anyone who's listening to understand that there are resources that can help them. And there's ways that you can overcome the trauma and continue being amazing at whatever it is that you do, that, you're contributing to the world.
Yes, thank you. And, speaking of resources, this might be a good opportunity to talk a little bit more about Calico. Like, at what point do you call Calico? When is it time to get that sort of intervention?
Yeah, that's a really great question. First, though, I do want to go back to a point that Annette said, therapy. Similarly went through super toxic work environments, plural, and really had to work on myself afterwards, because I lost all confidence in myself. I had a boss who was questioning my intelligence, and I let it get to me. Like, it can get really bad. And yeah, people that are out there, you can get help. And so folks like Calico, we're not therapists, we're not conflict mediators. So unfortunately, if your place is super toxic, there's got to be like a lot of help that needs to be done in repairing relationships and setting up positive structures before you can do work on, hey, let's make the place more inclusive. Because if you're talking about inclusion, belonging, equity, like hiring, people from diverse backgrounds, but you're bringing them into a super toxic workplace, like, they're not going to stay. They're going to leave. They're going to tell other people in their community, don't ever work for this place. It gets around like Glassdoor. Everybody checks Glassdoor before they go to a job, and people post real stuff in there, like real experiences. So if you want to get a head start on this stuff, like, as soon as you start seeing, before you start thinking about any problems that you might have, that's the time to call Calico. Like, call us when you're like, great, I finally, I have my startup, we got some funding, I have some employees, I really want to keep this awesome culture that we have going in our workplace alive so we can continue our work. That's when you bring us in. We help you with the structures. We help you set up with like practical tools. We help everybody get on the same page and have a same framework. Or we're also great if you're like grown, you had some structures, but then you're like, I'm starting to see some toxic elements. Like, I think the way this person that has a lot of power is going about things is maybe pitting people against each other. Or I think that, the ways in which we're doing decision making, like on the golf course, are leaving people out of the conversation. That's when you bring us in, because we'll be like, okay, let's take a look. Let's take a temperature check of the organization. We do climate surveys for folks like that want to see where they're at and see what are their options, what they can strengthen, what they need to like, okay, we need to triage this immediately, or things that they can put in place so that they can continue that work. Because the best thing is if you have that inclusive place first, and then you have all the things that you need. You have ability to communicate, you have ability to be vulnerable. Like both leaders and managers can apologize about problems, because everybody can make mistakes, right? And you start building that into the culture. Now, that doesn't mean that if you have a toxic workplace, you have to burn it down to the ground and start from scratch. Although sometimes, but so in those situations, we can work with, for example, the leadership group and be like, okay, let's take this down to brass tacks. What's going on? What are the issues here? What's giving you friction that you're not able to either work with each other or work well with your staff? And then we start, slowly building a relationship with folks in the organization, with staff, with their leaders and managers, so that we can better understand what's going on and start to tease things apart. What you don't want to call us in for is if you're the only person that wants things to change and nobody else is on board, that's going to be really hard for us to come in and do something. So in that case, then we would be working with you one-on-one, helping you figure out how to advocate for yourself, where you can go to protect yourself as you're going through this, and we can help you find some resources there. But yeah, so ideally earlier is better, right? Think about it. If you're you're in a kitchen, you're preparing a recipe. What do you need for success? Clean surface, fresh ingredients, you need the recipe and you need the time, right? You need some knowledge. And if you have a dirty kitchen, stale ingredients, you don't know what you're doing, you have 15 minutes to make a cake, that's not going to breed a lot of success. So if you think of things ahead of time, if you try to put in these structures and be intentional about how you actually want people to be with each other in your workplace, that makes a huge difference.
Love it. I love it. And as you're describing the analogy, I kept thinking of nailed it, people set them up to be terrible, right? It's a mess and not all the ingredients. So I have another scenario from a listener, and then Delsy has a question as well. So this scenario, I'm going to read it so that we capture it. And of course, it's been summarized a bit. And we'll name her Rose. She has a different name, but it's also a flower name, but just to keep her anonymous. So Rose here, she says, during our morning meeting recently, our boss announced that someone got promoted, and then they told all of us that we all have to do that person's former job because now they're off doing a different job. Don't get me wrong, I love my coworker who got promoted, but it's a problem that we got informed at the last minute, and now we have to do someone else's job on top of ours without the proper training or even a cheat sheet on what the heck we are doing. And then to make it worse, I'm assuming this is a school environment. To make it worse, a parent came into the office today and said, "It looks like you guys don't know what you're doing." And then I'm I kept this language here because I loved it. Para acabarla de cagar, which is just a Spanish expression for this is a terrible day here, just to make it even worse. Our director told us we cannot go to HR regarding these changes. Talk about toxic. So what is wrong with this scenario?
Anna, do you want to take the start?
Everything. Everything is wrong with that. So, from a management perspective, I'm a manager. If you're going to promote someone, you have to have a plan, right? Promotions don't come out of thin air. So the plan for the individual to set them up for success, transition plan, right? For the peers that no longer have their colleague, a time frame, right? There's got to be thought put into that, right? So one of the other tenets of white supremacy, I believe, is like speed. So rushing, right? That to me just sounds like that was like a knee-jerk reaction. Promote this person, no plan for transition, maybe no talking points for the other colleagues of like, this is how we're going to handle it, because what was said to the colleagues were ridiculous. Like, you're going to do this work and you can't go to HR. Like, all of that is no, right? That's just bananas. Like, never. Right. There should be language about how the role is going to be backfilled or not. And if the role is not going to be backfilled, then that means we're not going to do this work. Right. So all of that just sounds toxic and just disorganized and dysfunctional. It's setting up the remaining colleagues to not be successful. Right. And that also feels like a trap, which then brings into account psychological safety, right? If I feel like my boss is not setting me up for success, then that means my boss is setting me up to fail, which then does not make me feel comfortable about doing my best. And then asking me to do more work when I don't feel my best is just another layer of drama, right? So all of that is wrong, and just asking for a lot of swirl, and needing to have a succession plan is just like really basic, right? If someone goes up, then this work goes over here, or there's a temporary plan until someone else comes on. But yeah, all of that is just sounds like speed, and no.
And to top all of that off, to say like, and you can't go to HR. Like what do you mean there's no system of feedback? And obviously they're not managing, right? This person is not managing when they're just dictating what's going to happen, right? That's like the single decision maker. You're 100% right. Speed, having everything to be done yesterday, that is definitely an element of white supremacy, and doesn't give people a chance, succession in the work, support people, but also emotionally, like that's changing your team dynamics. So who is going to fill that role of, for example, this person was really great at project managing the team. So how are we going to learn some of those skills? Maybe there's a transition period where this coworker is helping people get oriented to their, the stuff that they were doing before, if they're going to like backfill it, for example. And then probably to get this coworker onboarded in their new stuff, and to create boundaries there. Because sometimes when we get used to a coworker, we're like, oh, Delsy was so good at this part. Like, I just can't do it by myself. Like, that means you haven't empowered the people that are now taking on that role or the new work to come into it on their own. And it can make a situation where, even though Delsy hasn't been in that position for 6 months, let's say, she is now being asked to come back and do this and do that. And, hey, help me with this. Hey, help me with that. And she never gets to fully be in her new role, right?
Yeah, thank you for that. I like that you all are talking a little bit about the different roles in an office workplace and the differences in level of responsibility specifically for leadership. But I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about, for those folks that are in leadership, how are they able to navigate maybe toxicity at a systemic level? Sometimes, there are managers that are kind of doing the best that they can, right? Leaders that are really have good intentions. They want to put these things in place, but there can be barriers from external sources. For example, external funding streams or ties to different entities in certain industries or norms in certain industries. How can they be part of the change at a systemic level?
Delsy, that's an awesome question, because at Calico, the way we see organizations is like little building blocks to create those systems. Because let's face it, like, people chose slavery, people chose discrimination, people chose to make things not accessible, for example, we can choose the opposite. So by making choices, even at the small level within your team, to make it more inclusive, to include the things that are helpful, is already making one difference. But if you say you're a manager, you're in a toxic work environment, but your team is like a little heaven of like goodness, right? Mm-hmm. You can actually bring that to other places, and it doesn't have to be a you against the world. It can just be a conversation of like, hey, I've been managing here for 5 years and I've noticed some things work really well and don't work well with our team. I'd love us to have an opportunity to all of us managers get together and share best practices and like have a space to discuss what things work. Or, the staff say, okay, this supervisor is the best and nobody wants to work with, Bob over there. So if this supervisor is the best, then maybe you can give some feedback. Like when you have the opportunity to share your input, then that's where you can get highlighted. And if leaders are, say you're in the upper levels, you're not just like middle manager, you're upper manager or C-level, you can look for allies together that see, okay, there's some things that are wrong here. We know we can't change, like, for example, your funder is, has some issues, but you like really depend on that money to get your programs to run or to, get your drugs to market or whatever. And then you bring the awareness first. So you're not the only one. You see who else is like, yeah, I get that. And then talk openly and together with folks to see like, what can we change? What can we not change? And for the things that we can't change, is there like a longer term solution? So I've come up with this with clients where so this is for a nonprofit, where their funding source is also a group that they work together with. And that particular group had a very, very, I don't want to say antiquated, but yeah, maybe it's antiquated, like older idea of what diversity, equity, and inclusion was. Whereas this group was like talking about social justice, systems of oppression, and they're working on these programs together and they just don't meet, right? And so the solution that we came to, which is still a work in progress, is to have the leaders of both teams who are on the same page have an open conversation of like, here are the things that I think we can change, that people are asking to change. Here are the things that we can't impact. And then them go ahead and be transparent with their teams and be like, these are the things we can change. These are the things we can't. Let's find like our strengths and rely on those for the things we can change. And for the things we can't, let's see like some mitigating strategies or maybe something that we can think of long term. So in that case, they were a part of the second team that had the antiquated stuff. They were part of a larger national organization that had very strict guidelines. And so for them, then they wanted to go advocate at the national level. So that's something that they're going to do in the long term. But yeah, it takes some strategy. It takes some thinking on how to change things on a systems level. So you can do things at the small part, but you also consider your major policies. Consider like what your company is supporting or not supporting, what kind of vendors you're working with. If your organization or company is involved in lobbying or is involved in like supporting different platforms, have them consider, okay, is this aligned with our values or not? How can we be a part of the change and move the needle? Because when we're all a part of it, that's when we really are able to make lasting change.
Did you want to add anything to that, Annette? And it's okay. Don't worry about it if you don't.
Yeah, I just second that. Those small choices, like that's my sneaky activism, right? So yeah. pushing back when someone pressures me to make a decision in the middle of a meeting. I say, I want to be thoughtful. I'll come back to you on this later today or maybe tomorrow, right? If there is a knee-jerk response to doing things the way we've always done them, sprinkle in a new idea. Those are the ways that I think change can happen that doesn't feel like this huge, big, like you know, we're going to rip the, you know, the cover off of this or whatever, the Band-Aid off of this, like really harshly, but it's like small steps that are very intentional, that, because behavioral changes, they do have to take those kind of like baby steps, right? And if it's too much, that's when you get the backlash. That's when you get the active like opposition to change, where people are very you know, against it. And so I just second everything you say. And there's a phrase that I've used in one of my women's leadership groups. It's called the island of sanity. And I'm very proud of the island of sanity that I have my like force field over, because it's very intentional. I make sure I pour into it, and I make sure that my folks feel safe as much as possible. And when I find out that my island of sanity has been disrupted, I take care of it.
Yeah, I love it. That force field that protects, that like maintains. That's a really beautiful and very good concept. I like that a lot.
And it should expand, right?
Yeah. That's the lovely part about the sneaky activism, like you say, is like then other people that are in the room, maybe they're not part of your team, are like, oh, this is a great way to look at things a little differently. Or, oh, that's right. Why did I just immediately run to answer that email at midnight when I could have just done it the next day when I've had my coffee? And, you know, like those small shifts and just having that and being there, they don't have to be huge changes. Those infect other people. Talking about the toxic workplaces, like antibiotics work the same way too. You know, like, you know, the our antidotes also can pervade, and they can, you know, infiltrate into different areas. And by maintaining that force field, other people will be like, you know, I want a force field too. And they're going to maintain another force field, and then another force field. And then slowly but surely, you know, everybody wants to be like Annette. Everybody wants to have like Annette's team. That's man, that's awesome.
Yeah. So just to conclude, and kind of in the spirit of the direction that we're headed here, of these the positive environments, like the things that we do like on our island. So if each of you, and Delsy too, and I'll think of one too, is if we can give an example of a green flag. You know, like, you know, we talked about red flags, you know, things that are toxic. But what is one really beautiful practice that you would like to see more frequently in places of work? And maybe we'll start with Lynette.
Okay, great question. I feel like I have a gazillion answers, but the one that's like bubbling up at top of mind right now is something that my co-AD Alexis and I do. And she's the one that brought the term to me, but it's called spinach in your teeth. And what it is like, if you're in a group of buds and you're like hanging out, having brunch or whatever, and you have like a big thing of spinach like stuck in your teeth, like, wouldn't you want somebody to tell you, like, hey girl, you know, like, come on, just, you know, go to the bathroom or whatever to fix it. And we apply that in terms of the workplace. So in our work, you know, thinking about people and culture, we want to be sensitive to everybody. We want to make sure that we're using the right language, that we're not perpetuating systems of repression, or, you know, falling on like bad jokes that discriminate against people, right? But, you know, hey, we live in a world where we're surrounded by that, and it can happen. But what matters is what you do afterwards. So if you spinach in your teeth yourself, like, oh, I messed up there. Sorry, I wanted to say this. Mm-hmm. Or when you talk about the spinach in your teeth between the two of us, Alexis will say, Lynette, I don't, you know, that term is actually outdated, and it means this now. What you want to use is this. I'm like, oh, thank you so much. And it gives us an opportunity to help each other out and move on, right? Not like, I'm going to be hurt forever because Lynette used the wrong term. It's Lynette used the wrong term, but I know she cares, and I'm going to give her an opportunity to fix it. And that way it makes it easier to talk about the little spinach and the really big spinach.
Yeah. Let's see, Annette, what's a green flag? One example.
Yeah, so one of my most memorable moments in the workplace with a former boss that she showed me who she was right away. Was she was very personable with everyone in the department, regardless of their grade level, title, whatever. And it was the most refreshing thing I had ever seen about her years later. But the first thing I noticed was she didn't exclude herself to only be around those at her level or above, right? Or even her peers, right? Whatever she did, whether it was going to the restroom, getting something to eat, passing by, she made sure to really acknowledge individuals. And that was really powerful. It made me feel safe. It made me feel included. And I wasn't that far away from her in level. I just found out a few weeks ago, I was running an idea brown bag at my job, and we were talking about allyship. And someone in the room who I've, become great friends and colleagues with shared that she felt comfortable in the workplace with me because soon after she joined the company, she's an admin, and she was working around all these scientists, right? And she just felt really intimidated. She said I was having a conversation with one of the senior research directors. And without skipping a beat, I looked over to her and I was like, so what do you think? And she said in that moment, she felt so safe and included and like she wanted to continue working there because someone that she thought of so removed from her talking about science made her feel comfortable. And I didn't even know that happened. I just found out about it, and this was like 6 years ago. And I almost cried because I was like, wow, I did that for someone. And then I thought, I also have the power to make someone feel very small, very unincluded, and maybe want to leave the company, right? So for me, the small acts of kindness, right? Seeing people, and regardless of what level they're at, making them feel like, I want to hear what you have to say, or how your weekend was, or maybe you don't golf, maybe you play an instrument, whatever it is, like seeing people for where they're at and that being just fine, right?
Yeah, that's a great green flag. And Delsy, is there something that you've seen and you want to see more of?
Yeah, I think for me, I really enjoy transparency at all levels. When a company is transparent about what their strategic plan is, what their funding is, what their challenges are, where you stand, where they stand, what their staffing plans are, and you have the opportunity to comment and to contribute to those plans. I think that's really important because I need to know if my company is struggling. I need to know that, right? Because this is my livelihood and so on. And so having that opportunity to be treated with the respect of a person that's part of the company and contributing and collaborating, I think transparency really makes me feel respected in that way.
Yeah, that's a really, really good one. What I'll add is, and it comes from, sometimes you learn, right? You learn from the mistakes or from the flags, from the toxic practices. And I remember seeing a colleague getting reprimanded in a group setting and feeling like, oh gosh, that's terrible. So I anytime that I have a direct reporter or somebody that I'm working with and there's some feedback that needs to be given, I really try to reserve that for one-on-one and never do it in front of others, because I remember how icky it was as a spectator to see that, and that's a green flag that I practice and like to see when feedback is that spinach thing, it's done in private and not in front of everybody. So I love that example. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, everybody here, for contributing your ideas, your suggestions, your recommendations, helping, I'm sure, our listeners feel heard and seen. This has been really wonderful. And we'll make sure that the show notes of this episode have not only both of your informations, but of course, information about Calico culture strategies, so that folks know how to get connected. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank
you for having us.
Yeah, this was wonderful.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Awesome conversation. Again, thank you everybody for submitting your scenarios, your situations. And in fact, if you left this conversation feeling like you want more help and you have more questions, we want to invite you to submit questions because we would love to do more of these listener submitted questions. So whether it's relationships, whether it's the workplace, send us whatever. We will gather it and we will come up with an episode where we address all of these questions. It's been so much fun to be able to do a little bit of that. But before we leave, we want to remind you that we are having an awesome opportunity, especially if you're local to Los Angeles. We're having an event, Tamarindo Live, a Tamarindo Live recording with Las Cafeteras at the Pop-Up in Highland Park. This is on June 20th at 7 p.m. And if you want to get tickets to this, which is free, by the way, but very limited, you have to sign up for our newsletter. So sign up for our newsletter. It is in our link in bio and all their socials. We will put it in the show notes of this episode. You can find it on our website. Get on our e-list and you'll be the first to know about cool opportunities like this. So make sure you save that date, June 20th at 7 p.m.
Yeah, and I also want to say, first, thank you so much to everybody who has submitted some kind of review for Tamarindo, who's let us know how they feel about the show, if they're enjoying it. This helps us out a lot when it comes to having new people discover the show, but also it's soul-filling for us, right? This is something that keeps us motivated and keeps us going. So if you're out there, you're listening and you love it, please leave us a review by going to Apple Podcasts, Tamarindo.
Yes. Okay. With that, y'all, ponte un suéter. See you at the next episode. Ciao.
Saludos a la familia.
Bye. Tamarindo Podcast is Brenda Gonzalez and Delsy Sandoval. We are also the show's executive producers. Karina Riveroll of Sonoro Media provides production support. Jeff Ricards wrote our theme song. The best way to support our work is to rate and review Tamarindo Podcast or share an episode with a friend. Get in touch with us at tamarindopodcast.com.